Welcome to episode 7. This one was with my good friend, Dane Hasell. We talk about the power of nature, why it's so important to get back to nature as a human being, and the power and the healing that it can bring into your life just by being in nature. I really enjoyed this conversation with my friend, Dane. I hope you do too. Hello, Mr. Dane.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
I'm good, man. So today I have my friend Dane on the podcast. He is one of the coolest dudes I've ever met. I was able to meet him about a year ago at a men's weekend that I went to, and I wanted to have him on the podcast today because I want to talk about nature with him. He is really passionate about getting people back into nature. I've found in my own life, I mean, you know this too, man, like anytime angry or frustrated, I feel kind of, I don't know, like there's a lot going on in my head. I go for a walk by a river or by a forest or in a forest somewhere, and it literally feels like nature is medicine. I heard somebody say that a while ago, and I literally have felt that many, many times. Like, what's your relationship been like with getting back into nature, and like, what do you think is like the importance of people being in nature?
That's a good question. I think at the tribal part of it is that humans we are essentially animals, and we belong in nature. We are nature, and right now, especially, we live in a very egocentric world where like I'm better than you, I can do this better than you, and we're not really living with our hearts anymore. We're more of living with like trying to be this like hierarchy and be the best in everything. Whereas if you take away that ego and you just be, and you just get to embrace and enjoy nature, that's where you get to be your truest self, I believe. What nature's done for me is, it's let me live like an ecocentric life where I get to be one with nature. Whether it's, like you said, when you're frustrated and you just need to let some steam off or whatever, you just seek nature, and you'll find that, go spend an hour in a forest, go do a cold dip, and I guarantee you will come out of that way more level-headed than when you went into it, for sure. For me, it's a sense of just being free, just and a big one for me is in nature is, don't get me wrong, trails are cool, but go find like off a service road and go into the forest, like actually immerse yourself into the forest, go lie in the moss, go hug a tree. It makes you feel alive. Like it really makes you feel human. But that's kind of it in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, man. I've felt it, and I think it's missing in a lot of people's lives. And I kind of laughed at it, like, go hug a tree. I've hugged a tree before, and it's like about it. I mean, it's like a kind of like a slang term for hippies. Like, you fucking tree huggers. It's like, yeah, man, I'll go hug a fucking tree. Like, some of those trees that you hug are like hundreds of years old. It's just, it's interesting how you said egocentric versus ecocentric. A lot of people have lost their connection to nature, especially in the Western society, the Western world. A lot of indigenous cultures have a really deep connection to nature. And I feel like I'm right now sitting in my spare bedroom looking out, and there's a road, there's a semi-trailer, there's cars everywhere, there's concrete everywhere. And I'm around it all the time. And I find myself, I'm very kind of an anxious, wound up person. I don't know if it's just the city that I live in. I think that has a massive part to play, but I found when I go out to nature and just be in nature and just like, I don't know, it does something really special to me. Has there been a part in your life where you've lost connection with nature for some reason? Like you lost that connection, because I'm sure you grew up around nature as a kid. Was there ever a time where you lost connection with it, and Tell us about that if there was that time, or have you always had a relationship and never lost the connection with it?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because I definitely lost my connection to nature when I moved to the city.
Mm.
And that's when the ego took over, where I was in a job making good money, working 10, 12, 11 hours a day to get ahead and keep going and going and going. And I never, I would do like the gross grind. I'd do this the chief out in Squamish, and I'd go to the lake. But the deep love definitely disappeared for a better part of 5-6 years, until I went traveling again, down to Australia, New Zealand. Spent a lot of time on the beaches there, going into the jungles and the forest again, and really finding it. And then when I moved back and I came back to the island, I was still very, very intertwined with that city life. And I didn't realize how I was going to survive over here for like 5-6 months. But then I slowly started getting back started hiking again, started fishing, started mushroom picking again, started immersing myself back into nature and integrating with it and doing my dance with it, that it was just like, I wouldn't go. And now that I've gotten older, I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. Like, I'll never leave this place. Or if it'll be into like deeper into the forest or higher up the mountain, one of the two.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that, because I feel like I grew up around nature. I grew up in Australia, as you know. I grew up on the coastline. I would go fishing every day after school. And there's something about when I go home to Australia, there's something about me and that water. When I dive into the ocean there, it's literally like bliss. There's no way to describe it. I literally dive into that water, and I know the feeling. I remember what it feels like. It's kind of like, like it literally feels like that.
Well,
And
you
I
get
felt,
feel like to be a kid again. Like, that's what you did when you were a kid, right? Like, that's the beauty of nature, is that especially if you grew up around nature and you were in it, when you get to revisit those feelings again, it's like you're a kid again. It's just bliss. Like, there's like, you have that feeling of no better feeling. Like when we on the retreat there, when we dipped in that creek, I used to swim in that creek when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, right? Like, that was like where I went every day. I would just go and spend time at that creek and that little pool there, like all the time, fish, trout. And yeah, and now it's, I might not swim there as often, but just like going there, immersing myself, doing my cold dip, it's just like, it just brings all that rush of emotion of being kid, of having, no expectations, no worries. You were looked after. It was like, it's that great feeling of like no responsibility.
yeah. One of my favorite quotes lately, man, is we spend half of our life trying to become an adult, and then we spend the other half of our life trying to become a kid again. I feel like that I've been trying to do that lately, like that kind of like, oh, I've got to make this much money per month. I got to get this car. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And I've got to get a mortgage, and I've got to do this shit, this shit, this shit. And don't get me wrong, like, I want my own home one day for sure. I currently rent. I've had nice cars. I had an Audi before. I traded it in for a Tesla. A Tesla is a nice car, but I don't need it. I could sell it tomorrow and be like, I don't need it at all. And when you say that, like that feeling of being a kid again, yeah, it does do that to you. And that's why a lot of people are they're kind of too serious. It's like they're too kind of like wound up. And I think that you need to kind of slow down a little bit. And that's what nature does. It allows you to slow down, be with yourself. And that's why we went out to Tassos. Dane hosted like a wilderness retreat recently in Tassos. It's this tiny little place on the west coast of Vancouver Island. There's probably 200 people that live there, maybe 100.
I think total is 190
190.
of like actual distance.
And it was just such a nice time. Like, we climbed up a mountain, we meditated, we did lots of stuff in nature. We went in this little creek that obviously Dane just spoke about, we grew up in. It was a cold dip, and it's just a beautiful place, man. There was no traffic. It was just quiet. And it was just, I could feel like, I could just feel myself relaxing. And it's funny, Mom. Lexi and I went away for my birthday probably about 5 years ago on this little island on the Sunshine Coast off a place called Egmont. And the lady that hosts this island is literally like a private island, and there's a yurt on it. There's 2 different yurts. It was sick. It was amazing. And she said some people go there and they stay there for an hour from the city, and they can't handle the quiet and the silence, and they have to leave, and they literally pay for their Airbnb and they go home because they can't handle the quiet and the silence and the calm. And it just makes me think that so many people are probably so wound up in their life that they don't even know what it's like to be calm.
Well, it's and like it goes into like that. Don't quote me here, but I think it might be Joe Dispenza that talks about like you're addicted to that, right?
Yeah.
Because people are addicted to that environment. Like they can't. That's how they operate, is in that environment. So all of a sudden, when they find that little bit of solitude, it's like they don't know what they do, and they freak out. Like they need that busyness, they need that go that. But like the retreat you talk about and bringing people in the nature is like, that's what, you influence that different way of living, that different way of like, showing people it's okay to be silent. It's okay to be in solitude. It's okay to one of my favorite ones was Bill Plotkin, where he talks about, being lost is okay. Like, it's okay to get lost. That's, when you're, just don't freak out. You can be lost in life. You can be lost in the forest, but like, as long as you can hold that and just like embrace that's okay. Embrace being lost. It's, that's where you find yourself the most, right? You can, like, just the other day I was on a hike with my boys, and we found this new trail that I've never been on. And it was like, I had no idea where we were, not one clue. Like, oh Jesus. But we just like, kept going along the trail and kept going along the trail. And we ended up intersecting with one of the main trails, which I recognize. And it was like, oh, sweet. Like it just figured itself out, right? And I think that's that environment. When people get into that environment, they just freak out so bad that they don't know how to react. They get really caught up in their own stories in their own head. And that, I think, to go back to your point that you first brought forward about like what nature does, is it can get you out of that mind psyche of like, being okay with who you are, with what you are. And yeah.
It's funny how you say that people are addicted to that. I have a thing that I'm working on right now that I'm really realizing. For a long time, I thought that I couldn't achieve anything if I wasn't scared and anxious all the time. I mean, obviously I didn't realize that at the time, but that's what the actual situation is. If I'm not fearful or in a scarcity mentality, I feel like I don't have any drive. And if I feel calm, I'm really working on this. I've really gotten better at it lately. But if I felt calm or had a tranquil moment, or I had a moment of solitude where I was just felt calm, I thought I was being lazy. And I'm like, I'm being lazy right now. I'm not where I want to be. There's no time to rest. And I would constantly, like, if I ever felt calm or relaxed, I would literally purposely pull myself out of that situation, because like you said, like, I'm addicted to that feeling of anxiety. Like a lot of us are addicted to our emotions. Like, oh, I don't like it. It's like, I never said you liked it. I mean, people who are addicted to heroin, I'm sure they don't like it, or addicted to methamphetamine, or addicted to anything. I'm sure they're not like, I love this. It's an addiction. And it's not like, nobody wants to be addicted to anything, I don't think, but I've noticed that within myself. And when I go into nature, that goes away and I can get a perspective and I feel myself slowing down. I'm like, well, if I just have this rampant kind of like scared all the time and think that I made 10 grand this month. Oh, that's not good enough. I need to make 12. I need to make 15. I need to make 20. And it's just that game will never end. And it doesn't, I felt just as scared making 10 grand a month than I did when I made 25 grand in a month one time. And I just was like, and it's all related to this. And when I go out into nature, I'm just like, that shit matters, but it doesn't matter nearly as much as people think it does. What matters is I'm a human being. I'm put on this earth to experience life and the beauty of it. And if I am constantly running away from nature or running away from these things, it's like you can't experience these things. Yeah, it's interesting you say that about being addicted to that stuff. And
yeah, you know, like, you know, you chose this life, but you also get to choose how you want to live it as well, right? Like, you can make 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, 10,000, 5,000. Shit, you can make $1,000 and you could still be in that same state unless you choose to not live in that state anymore, right? Like a lot of the things that we do are choices.
Yeah.
And it comes down to choices. Like, you know, one of our friends there, he would get in his head so much that he wasn't doing his daily practices, but really he was just choosing not to do that daily practice. But when you choose to actually do it and commit yourself and actually do that, that's where you're going to see that change. That's where you're going to notice the differences of like how you react in situations, how you receive stuff, how you perceive stuff. And then the more you do that, the more you actually go out and just get off your ass and get out into nature, you're only going to see the benefits more and more and more the more you do it. But if you just sit there and you're worried about, you know, how much money you're going to make in that month, hey, like, oh, I'll get out, you know, I'll go out in nature. Yeah, I'll get there and I'll get there. And then all of a sudden, you know, that 1 month turns into two turns into 4. And all of a sudden it's like a year's gone by and like, you haven't gone out into nature once, but you're still worried about how much money you're going to make the next. It's like, well, nothing really changed because you haven't made that choice yet. It's always up to the individual, right? Like no one can do it for you. You got to be consciously make that choice yourself. And I think the more conscious people are and are starting to see like more and more of that change, you're going to see a lot more people emerge back into nature, which will see that transitioning from that egocentric to the ecocentric, where we can start living a lot more in like harmony, not just with like each other, but like nature again, right? We can start respecting it the way it should be respected, and where it's kind of fallen off from definitely in the last like 100 years, like big time. But
yeah, it's sad what you see sometimes. Like I don't think there's any reason to ever cut down a 1,000-year-old tree. Like no, if you need the timber, just there's sustainable ways of doing it. Like in Australia, they have these blue gum farms, and these blue gums, they grow really tall in like 2 or 3 years, and they use it for wood chips, and they just wipe down the whole forest, and it's grown back in 2 years, and they wipe it down again, and it's like, why can't you just do that? Like, why do you need to cut down 1,000-year-old trees? It's just like all the great movies that we love. Like, think about Avatar.
Oh man.
Think about Avatar. Think about that movie and what it really is saying. Like, what is it really saying? It's like, I mean, it's a beautiful message. It is, and it like gives me goosebumps thinking about it. But to be honest, we live in a world where the machines and the machines of industry are kind of winning.
Yep.
And it's not like we have a magical dragon that's going to assemble all the tribes to fight against that machine. I mean, who knows? Mother Nature, it'd be fucking cool. Like, holy shit.
I would definitely fly one.
But yeah, it's just interesting because it's like, if you see Mother Earth as like this being almost, and I've felt it. I've felt it a few times. I remember it was probably like 6-7 years ago. I took some mushrooms, took some magic mushrooms, and in Kelowna, and I was sitting there by the lake, and I felt this deep connectedness to the earth, and I could kind of sense all these people there at the beach. There was people there, but then I saw this really cool, like First Nations canoe. It was like a traditional canoe, and I was looking at it, I was like, is that even real right now? Like, holy shit. And there was these First Nations people paddling on the lake in this canoe, and they had this like really different energy about them. And all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, these people look at the world very differently. And I just had this like almost this understanding all of a sudden. And I had a client at the gym at that time who was First Nations. And I spoke to him on Monday, and I told him about the story and how I had this deep connectedness. And I went into a bunch of detail about what I realized. I'll never forget, he didn't say anything. He just kind of smiled at me and put his hand on my shoulder. He just said nothing. He said nothing. He put his hand on my shoulder and smiled at me. He's like, yeah, dude. That's how I felt. He's like, yeah, man. And it's interesting. We kind of lost connection with that. Like, we have this very Western, mechanical, money-driven view of the world. And then there's other cultures that view it totally different. And I think the sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, because you can use the land and you can farm it and you can do that stuff, but you can do it in a sustainable way. You don't have to destroy it. You can do it in a sustainable way, but the problem is that's the long road. That's the long game. And people are like, oh, well, if I could just knock down this forest and get this timber rather than waiting for a bunch of trees to grow, we can get it done in 5 years versus 20 years. But people don't get it. It's like we're destroying the planet by doing that shit. It's just like, I don't know. I could talk about it all day.
Yeah, like it doesn't, and it's only that like that little bit of force that they take down is only serving that bit of time. It's not
exactly
everlasting. It's not, and I know it's interesting because they call it sustainable industry, but then they go and knock down the first growth. It's, for me, I'm like, well, if this is so sustainable, why are we knocking down the first growth? You should be logging the stuff that was logged in the 40s and the 30s and the 20s.
Yeah.
That stuff should be grown back, and you should be, but yeah, man. And like, that's another touchy subject that people bring up, but we've raped and pillaged this earth so much in every industry, in every possible way, and yet we still are trying to find ways to not try and replenish it. Like there's a lot of good out there that people are doing, but there's still a lot of people that don't really care. Like, just don't. Like, I had my nephews and my niece up in Tasses this last week, and just seeing how they not only didn't even go out in nature, they just, didn't, simple things like, do some recycling, or like pick up, just throwing wrappers like on the ground, and like just not even like conscious of like the impact of what they're doing. And it's sad. It's really sad. It really is. And like, and we're all guilty. That's the thing. Unless everyone is guilty in this of taking away from the earth, but now we need to like find a way to give it back. And I think that's like an important part of it. And like you said earlier, like nature's medicine, like it can be so healing in itself, and we don't have to keep destroying it. You can do stuff sustainably, and we just need to find better ways to do it sustainably instead of just keep like pillaging it.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about your boys? Obviously, you got 4 boys, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
do you feel like as a father, the importance of bringing your kids out into nature? I'm really grateful for my dad. We always went out in nature, went fishing, went hiking. One of my best memories with my dad in nature. Like, do any of your boys go to school yet?
We homeschooled them this year.
Yeah.
And then we're probably gonna keep doing it. It's for me, it's super important to take your kids out into nature,
Yeah.
because then they understand a bit of like respect, and they understand significance. Um, like when I take the boys fishing, we go fishing, we catch a fish, we eat the fish, right? We don't
Yeah.
and throw it back or waste it, and then you use the rest of it or the head and the tail for like crab bait, and you can set your crab traps to catch crab.
Yeah.
For me, not only is it like a bonding thing, but it's also giving them independence, right? Like, you show your kids the knots, when they find out how to do a knot, or they find out, like my 2 kids know how to cut kindling and start a fire, and they start a fire up in Tassus all the time. Some of my friends' kids know how to turn on their Switch and play video games for 2 hours. I don't know, like, I don't agree with that stuff. That's me though. That's my personal choice. That's my perspective on it. Like, my nephew, who hasn't had like a father figure or a mother figure in his life, he could tell you every trick and code in this game and that game, but does he know how to paddle a canoe? Does he know how to swim? Like, that's like taking my kids out in the lake and going fishing with them has been their best swimming lessons.
Mm.
Like there's some kids in my kids' swimming lessons that are scared shitless to jump off the edge into a pool. Like, so scared. Like, one kid was like crying on the edge of the pool. And in my mind, I'm like, it's unfair me to make assumptions, but I'm like, you've probably never taken your kid to a lake or a river and actually like got him to start swimming, right? Learning to swim in a pool of chlorine. And again, it's all these things that nature can give you without having to, I don't know. It's super important for me with my boys. Like, they get to learn how to handle a knife. They get to identify plants and trees and mushrooms, and you can make it like very educational. You don't
Oh
need,
yeah.
the cool thing is like we'll collect leaves, and then we'll go through like our plants book, find the leaves, be like, oh, this is an alder leaf, this is like a big leaf maple, this is the hemlock, this was a spruce or whatever, right? And then all of a sudden they pick up these things, like maybe they're not learning the stuff that their peers are learning, but there's a really good book. I'd have to ask Mel, and I can text it to you, but it's based around like when you let your kids get raised by their friends, they're raised by their peers, that then they slowly start distancing themselves from like mom and dad, and then they start distancing themselves from the things they learned, which really made them happy. Like, say your kids you brought them out in nature, you went camping with them, you took them to the lake, the rivers, all that stuff. They slowly start, that's the stuff that made them really happy. But because their peers might have not have done that, and all of a sudden they want to do what their peers were, now they're being taken away from what actually made them happy. So now they're just living a life that they don't really want, but because they're accepted by their peers, now it's fine, right? Then they start really getting off track about how they want to live.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually did a podcast about that a lot of people will change who they are because they want to fit into a tribe, even if that tribe isn't true to who they really are. And then you have a choice. You have a choice. Choice number one is remain this person that you created to fit into that tribe, or be authentic to yourself, but then you run the risk of not being in a tribe temporarily. Like, because if you're like, hey, I don't want to hang out with these people, then you are now excluded.
Yeah.
And
And the thing they don't realize is that they'll find, if they actually stuck to their guns and did that, they would find that tribe
yeah.
that accepts them in that, right? But you try and tell like a 14, 15-year-old kid about, like they just don't see that, right? They don't understand that. So then it's, they'd rather, smoke their weed, drink their booze, and like I'm just as guilty. Like I'm
Yep.
not, I
Same.
did that through my teens, my 20s, like 100%, man. Like, I rolled with the cool kids. It, and really it took me away from like really who I was at that time, right? Like, yeah.
How do you feel now? Obviously, how old are you now?
36.
So you're 36. What kind of lessons have you learnt lately from nature? Like in the past 12 months, what kind of really big realizations have you had in nature? Just in nature, you're not maybe doing any breath work or anything, like you've just been walking along. Is there anything that you've realized about your life or things that have come to that has been really impactful that you could maybe share that come to mind when I ask you that question?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've learned to, especially in the last couple of years, that like nature's your friend. Like, and I mean, like stuff and, like meditation and all that stuff is really great, especially when you're in nature. But I mean, and yeah, I know you might laugh about this, but like, talking to a tree, just like venting to a tree, to a rock, and then just being able to like actually see like the beauty of nature. Like when you're like, the other day I was sitting there, I went for a hike. I went up to this little rock crop. I was sitting there, and this little fish jumped, and then this eagle just like took off from the tree, and he was just gliding. It was just like, just gliding. And I was just like, look how free that little fish and that bird is right now.
Mm.
Like, and then just the other day, sitting at the Tassa's house, I was looking out, there was a seal that was just playing. It was just playing. It was just being a seal. And then this ties into when I went hiking on the Cape Scott Trail with our friends there, and we saw this bear. And this bear, and I think I've told you this before.
I know this story.
And this bear was just, he was just flipping logs, looking for bugs, just eating. And then we went back to camp. We were talking about how cool that was. And then Steve turned to me and he was like, that bear, he was just bearing around. Like he wasn't trying to be anything else. He wasn't trying to be a deer. He wasn't trying to be an eagle. He wasn't trying to be a freaking elephant. He was just being a bear. So that's all anyone's ever asked of him. Just be a bear. So that's all he was doing. And I think that the answer to your question is that like, that's what nature is. It's just like, be yourself. Like that's one of the biggest messages. Like, like a tree is a tree, like Douglas fir is a fir, like a hemlock's a hemlock. Like they're not trying to be anything else. Like that seal just being a seal, that eagle was just being an eagle. Doesn't know how to be anything else, right? So like, when I go out in nature, it just shows me that like, just be myself, just be free, just be natural, just be who you are. I think that'd be like the biggest message that like nature's ever taught me is, when you scrape down a yard and you leave it for a year and grass grows back, right? That's the only thing it knows to do is just grow back. Like it just comes back and it's grass again. It's just being grass, just being itself. Like I'd say that's the biggest message I've gotten from nature is, yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's just like all we can really be is ourselves. And if we try to be something else, it's just, how long can you be somebody else for until it just is getting, it's old. Like I see so many people that try to be what other people think that they want them to be.
Well,
um
34 years. So
oh man. Yeah, it's crazy, dude. It's crazy. It's crazy what that realization is. It's really like, we're human beings. We're not human thinkings or human doings. We're beings. We should just be. A lot of us think that we have to do human doings. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to achieve this. I got to achieve that.
that it comes with like, I like my opinion, and it just comes from like society's expectations of like what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. There's all these expectations, like like for me, for instance, like you're successful in a business, right? That's the expectation, is like you need to be successful. For me, it's like I need to be like this father, right? Like people expect what a father is, right? It's a big expectation. It's still a responsibility, but it's like, everyone's expectations of you when you become a father, when you get into a friendship, when, and especially in life, like be a good person. Well, what is a good person? Like, everyone's got a different views of a good person. Everyone, and I don't know. It's like those expectations that get set on you that all of a sudden you try and live up to, and it sometimes those expectations take you away from who you actually are.
Yeah. What is some suggestions of people that feel like they're trying to find their own voice, but they're maybe so weighed down by expectations of their mom and dad or their spouse or their friends or their job? I mean, I think I know your answer. We get out in nature more to get to know yourself. That's how I would answer it. But
Yeah.
how would you answer it? Like somebody who's really struggling to find their voice, like maybe go back to Dane when he was living in the city, maybe that you did lose your connection to nature. Maybe you felt that way. Like, what do you think about that? What's your perspective on that?
I would say people need to, like, if someone were struggling and they came and said, hey, like, I don't have my voice, they need to ask themselves, like, who they are. Like, who are they at the core? At the core of themselves, who are they? And like, they really need to be like really straight with themselves. Like, say if they're having, their dad wants them to go to this college, but he doesn't want to. Well, hey, like, do you really want to go? And if the answer is no, then they need to express that, right? Like, they need to find out who they are. Maybe that's going traveling for 2 years. Maybe that's taking a hiatus. Maybe that's changing careers. But like, people really need to find who they are at their core. Like really, really question stuff, right?
Yeah.
Where they're, and again, like you said, just go to in nature, spend some time in solitude in nature by yourself for 3-4 days, and you probably have a good idea of who you really are.
Yeah. Turn the phone off, go out in nature. Some people can't do that, man. Some people thought that the thought of being by themselves, I've been here before. I remember when I was single for a couple of years, I found it, it's not funny. I just realized that like I could not sit in a coffee shop by myself. I'd feel like people would be laughing at me because I'm by myself. It was this crazy insecurity. And it's really because there was some stuff that I wasn't willing to face. Cool thing about nature is that there's no tree that's going to laugh at you. Like you're just being out there and you can just sit there. And I think a lot of people, a lot of the stuff I say is because it comes from me. And I know I've expressed things to other people, and I know that they've said to me like, yeah, man, I feel the same. A lot of people don't like being by themselves, or basically purposely don't do it, because then they might have to think about the stuff that's really underneath, that's really driving their behaviors, the trauma, the shit that happened to them when they were a little kid, the shit that happened to them when they were a teenager, a young adult, that relationship that didn't work out, the real reason why they got fired from that job that they really loved. Like all that kind of stuff. If you sit in nature and really sit there, or just, I think nature's the best way to do it. There's something about it. I mean, you could sit in an apartment building, but there's something about being in a concrete box versus around some trees and like the sound of a soft stream. It's different. It's very, very different.
Oh, it's
But,
very, and like, they touch on what you kind of said there about, I forget how you worded it, but like where they, you know, they have to be okay with themselves, because if they're not, they're always going to keep trying to find things to fill that time so they don't have to sit there and dig into their shit.
yeah.
Right. Like that's why people get caught up in bad relationships, is that like that relationship is letting them act. It's enabling them to be who they are, but it's also taken away from who they actually really are. Right. It's just enabling this, like this ego. Whereas if they weren't in that relationship and all of a sudden they're by themselves and all of a sudden they go and find another relationship, yeah, like, what are you running from? What do you keep, like, dive into that. Let's explore that. Let's see, like you said, like, why didn't that relationship work? Why did I get really fired from that job? And some people don't like that shit, man. Some people don't like those tough questions of
No, because
themselves.
it's fucking uncomfortable, and you felt it. I've felt it. I've felt working on those questions. I've literally felt like when people have asked me questions like that and they start getting deep with me, whether or not it's with a therapist or some kind of retreat that I've been on, and somebody asks me questions about me, I've literally felt the feeling of feeling like a caged animal. It literally feels like that. I feel like that I'm being interrogated and attacked, because like, hey, what's the real reason you really do that? Like, what's the real reason that you feel like you need to bake a bunch of money? Was there a point in your life that you didn't feel safe? And it's just like, what about 10-year-old Ahren thinking? You're like, oh, fuck, shit. And you're like, I felt feeling like a caged animal. I want to run away right now. I don't want to be here. And you have to, like you said, you have to sit in your shit. It's like what Joe Dispenza says, like, sit there like a dog and just sit there and feel that stuff. And it's really, really, really uncomfortable sometimes. So any person that's maybe listening to this, if you struggle with that, highly recommend seeing a professional. Like, there's some stuff that needs to be dealt with a professional, whether or not it's abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, like deep things like the death of a family member or something like that. Like, yes, it's good to sit there and be with yourself and go out into nature. But if you really got some stuff and you do, and you really want to work on it, go see a professional. It's amazing what it can do for you. But also there's amazing tools like going out in nature, going for a cold dip, learning how to breathe and be in your own body and things like that. Then you can combine those two. I've literally gone, sat in a cold dip in a river out in nature, and you just breathe. And it's like, you get high, man. That's a high. That's an amazing feeling. I love that feeling.
Yeah,
I love
it's
it.
especially when it's like good, clean mountain water from a rain. That's just like, there's one thing like going in, into like a cold tub with ice or something like that, and that's great. But I mean, when you go out into like the ocean, lake, or like a creek coming down like the mountainside and stuff like that, I don't know. It's hard to even put words to it, because it's so invigorating, right?
There's
It's
actually
like,
science behind it too. There's science and minerals that come off these rocks that are filtered out through our water system that we drink out of our taps. Like, there's literally, I remember Marcus a long time ago sent me this podcast about this guy kept on going up to the top of this mountain and getting his own water. And then they tested it, and the ions that were in it were like 200,000 times. was just crazy. I can't remember the exact stuff, but it was so deep, and it was just like all these different ions and this different mineral that was in this water and what it does to you when you drink it and how it binds with stuff in your cells. And I was like, holy shit, this is a mind-blowing podcast. And it was so mind-blowing and so detailed, I can't remember it. What I do remember it is just there's minerals in water that come off rocks and mountains that can do things to you that when you sit in them or when you drink them, obviously don't just go drink random water. You never know. There could be a dead animal upstream and then all of a sudden you get sick. But like, it's amazing what that stuff does. And there's actually science behind it. It's not just us two like talking about hippie bullshit, being like, yeah, dude, it's so totally sweet, like sitting in the rivers, like, dude, there's actual science to it. There's real science to it, and it's amazing. And then like, what's really cool is when you hear about this science and then you hear about all these traditions that maybe First Nations people of any different culture, whether it's Aboriginal people in Australia or people from the jungle in Mexico or people who are First Nations in Canada and the United States, they've been doing certain things. And then science is like catching up to it. Like, oh, these people have been doing this shit for thousands of years. And then you see the science of it. So it's like, oh my God. So there's so much. Yeah. It's like this deep wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah, people need to get out in nature more. That's what's missing, I think, especially in cities. I mean, I know a lot of people that move away from cities. I've got to the point now, we're moving out to Langley in a month from now, and it's quieter out there. It's not as big city feel. It's still, there's a lot of buildings and stuff, but it's quieter, and I can go walk by a stream and not hear traffic and not hear sirens, which would be nice. But yeah, like what is a tip that maybe you could give to somebody that maybe does live in a city that is like, well, how do I get out in nature every day if I'm surrounded by concrete? Like, what would you, I mean, do you mean, like, do you think walking in a park? Obviously there's parks everywhere, there's grass everywhere. Like, what advice would you give somebody that's living in a city that's not living on the island? You're surrounded, I've been to your house, you're surrounded by trees and rivers. It's the ocean's freaking 10-minute drive from your house. Like, what advice would you give to somebody who's maybe isn't so lucky to be so surrounded by nature, that wants to be like, you know what, I want to get out in nature, I want to be a real human being? What advice would you give?
Well, a few. I mean, you could search like retreats, vacations, like when you decide to do like a vacation, instead of like bombing down, to Mexico or something like that, is like, make it, we live in one of the most beautiful parts of the world.
Yeah.
Like 4 hours, you're in the interior of BC. I mean, there's so many amazing lakes and streams and rivers from, Vancouver all the way up to Prince George.
Yeah.
Like Shuswap, the Okanagan, like not just Kelowna, but like there's tons of little places along there that like Smithers. Like I went hunting in Smithers a couple of years ago. It was like the most gorgeous place ever. Like, just, yeah, you need, again, I think it comes to making that choice and that commitment to yourself. And the second one is like, just find some cool places in your area and then explore it a little bit more. Like the Lynn Valley is amazing, but if you go off trail a little bit, you can find some even more amazing places. Same with like, there's, I think it's top of my head, is it the Baden Powell Trail that goes from North Vancouver to the Squamish?
Yeah.
And I think the Howe Sound Trail, those are some big, cool, where you're up in nature away from the city, and is it, what's the one out just past Langley's at McMillan Park?
Yeah, I think so.
Park.
Manning Park's like past Hope.
Yeah, okay. I think that's the big one. Like, there's places that are close by.
Yeah.
It's that commitment though, right? Like, how bad do you want it? You got
to see the value in it first. Like, if people don't do things if there's not value, and it's just like, if you're maybe feeling stressed and anxious all the time and you haven't tried going and spending a few hours in nature, leave your phone in the car. Leave your phone in the car. Try to find the most naturey spot you possibly can, and just try to take that time and see how it makes you feel. And if it makes you feel great, then maybe you should do it more.
Exactly, right? And just like, like you don't need, a practice. The reason people doing practices fail is because, like they want to go to the gym. So all of a sudden they'll go, first time, I'm going to go to the gym, and they try and go for a 3-hour workout. And then the next day they go for a 3-hour workout. And then the third day they're like, no, I'm just going to do 2 hours today. Then the next day it's like an hour. And then all of a sudden Friday rolls around. It's like, oh, I'm going to rest for a couple of days. And then Monday,
they're so burnt out.
Like, go and do it like, 15 minutes in nature, go for a little walk. Then the next day, do 20 minutes. Then the next day, an hour. And then, when the weekend comes, take an hour and then decide to sit for 15 minutes of that hour at this favorite spot that you found. Like, you don't go and just all of a sudden submerge yourself for 2 hours the first time and just be like, oh yeah, that was great. Like, make it
because then you think you can't do it again, and we won't say, if your life does get busy, you're like, I don't have 2 hours right now. It's like, well, maybe you don't need 2 hours.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this saying, like, I heard this guy say once, like a motivational speaker, he's saying that intensity, which is what you just said, intensity can never replace consistency. He's like, you can't not brush your teeth for an entire year, then brush your teeth 24 hours straight for 7 days in a row and expect to still have a nice smile. He's like, you can't eat like shit for 20 years and go on a 7-day juice cleanse and expect to lose weight. You can't be perpetually anxious and then go out on a 4-day nature retreat where you go sit in nature on a rock meditating and then expect it to fix everything. You need to find these, like you said earlier, these daily practices. If you can't get out into nature every day, I mean, just find maybe a park in your city that has like a little stream or something that has some trees, and maybe just sit there. That is, I mean, it's not nature if it's still surrounded by traffic or whatever, but I mean, it's better. It's better than nothing. And then on the weekends, you can take that time and,
even that's so right. Like, I'll make a reference with like trauma, right? Like, everyone has their own version of trauma. Trauma is trauma. If that's your version of nature, where you can find a little stream in your city that you get that peacefulness, that's okay. Like, take that little bit.
Yeah.
Because then that can start that consistency. Then maybe you just perk up and be like, you know what? I'm going to go drive for an hour and go to Manning Park and just see how much more I can get out of this now. Right? Even that, with that little stream, that little trickle in your city, it can set you on a pathway to more discovery of what nature can do for you.
It's a gateway stream. It's a gateway.
It'd be a gateway stream. It's my gateway stream.
Yeah, buddy, I found this trickle and now I'm hanging out with raging rivers.
Yeah.
Buddy, exactly. you gotta settle down.
It all comes back to the people's choice though, right? Like, I mean, especially when it comes to nature, because nature's so, it's like that old saying with like, you don't know what you have until it's gone, sort of thing, right? And it's like, all of a sudden, like, even where I've grown up now, it's crazy how like forest, I feel so old, because it's like, I tell my kids, I'm like, yeah, we used to build forts in that subdivision, like where it used to be like a huge forest. And now it's just like, concrete structures, roads, shopping centers. And it's like, Jesus. And then, you slowly start getting pushed out more and more, which is great for me, because it's like, great, I just get to go into the hills more and the mountains more. But it's, people, especially I find people in BC don't understand how beautiful it actually is here if you just get out and explore it a bit more. Like, man, you I've met like Europeans, people from Australia, Asia, like all over the world that come here, and they're just like blown away of like the beauty.
Yeah.
Like, my one buddy, we took him up the Tasses. He's like, you got to bring some of my friends here. They would think this is like Narnia. Like, it's like goddamn Avatar up here. It's like, yeah, man, like it really, really is. And like,
Yep.
don't be wrong, like, Australia is beautiful. Like, Asia is beautiful. Like some of the jungles I went in and stuff. But if you can't get to those places, start exploring your backyard. Start out, like last year doing the Cape Scott. I went to San Josef Bay. It was like the most beautiful beach I've ever seen. Like, it was just like purpley black white sand, like rock stacks, forest trail. There's a lake on the way. I mean, you really don't need to go far, I guess, is like what I'm saying.
Yeah. So it's just a choice, like you said.
Yeah, like people have no problem laying down $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 for plane tickets to go places, but they don't want to pay $500 to, jump on the island or get up to the interior or go along the coastline. Like Haida Gwaii, like that place is like phenomenal.
Yeah, I'd love to go there.
Even the little, like the archipelago, like the Bronte Islands. Like there's like, humpbacks, orcas, porpoises, seals, eagles. It's just like, it's just crazy. But yeah, man, I think it all just starts from that choice of like people wanting to do it, right? It's hard because people get caught up in that, lifestyles. People have bills, but yeah.
If you're just so caught up though, trying to pay your bills, are you really living or are you just surviving?
Yeah.
I heard this quote once. I don't know who originally said it, but it's so good. The quote is, but it could be applied to women, of course, but the quote says, most men are living a life of quiet desperation. I remember hearing that. It's just like, imagine you're like 40 years old, you got a couple of kids, costs $2 or $3, $4,000. Oh, I don't know how much school costs. Say it costs $2,000 a month for your kids to go to school, and you got your $2,000 mortgage, and you got your $600 car payment. You got a couple of credit cards that a little bit too much on them because you spent too much at Christmas trying to look after your kids, and your mother-in-law is kind of sick and needs a little bit of financial support, and you're just going to work every day, and you don't feel like that you can take time for yourself and go out in nature. But what people don't realize that if they just live that life, I mean, a lot of people live that life, and it kind of, when I describe that, I'm like, part of me just, the thought of that just makes me like nauseous. I don't want to live that kind of life. But if somebody is listening to this that feels like they're that way, you got to understand that if you don't look after yourself, if your cup becomes empty and you don't fill it up by looking after yourself, what will happen is that you won't be able to pour into everybody else's life around you, and you'll end up, stuff can come out in really unhealthy ways. Like one day you pick up a drink and you just pick up a drink every day after work, and then you pick up 2 drinks after work, then 3, then 4, and all of a sudden your marriage is gone, you lost your job. Like that can happen very easily if you don't look after your mental health. And I think that what we're talking about here is really just looking after your mental health. Going out in nature will help your mental health because it will help you bring back to what it means to be a human.
Yeah, it's, and like one thing I could say to your viewers is like, it's okay to be selfish. Like, look after yourself. Like, yeah, like I have 4 kids. Some days I tell them, like, fuck off. I'm going for, like, I'm out. Like, see you later. See you in 2 hours. I'm gone. Like, I need my time. Like, like I need to do things, because when I get to do that for myself, then when I come back, I get to be that dad that I want to be. Right.
Yeah.
like if I don't take time for myself and I don't get to do the things that I want to do, then I just start creating resentment towards people that I just want to love, because now all of a sudden my kids are taking me away from the stuff I want to do. My wife is taking me away from the stuff I want to do. And all of a sudden it starts this like perpetual cycle of like, they're almost getting in the way of me enjoying life. And that's not true.
No.
But it does start that cycle if you don't just like step away and be like, you know what? I need to do this for myself. I need to do this to make me happy. If that's one, like, I'm not saying, go on a holiday by yourself for 8 days and be like, peace out. But I'm like, 1 to 2 hours, like you deserve it. Like, holy shit, like you're important and like you deserve that. So like giving that to yourself, I think that's, it's not that much to ask of, your kids, your wife, your friends, and yourself. Like, shit, if you can't give yourself 1 or 2 hours a week to just like fucking unplug, man, I just feel, I feel bad for you. Like that sucks, man. Like that, but with that said, I would encourage you to find that little bit of time where, you can, and it doesn't even have to be in nature. Like shit, if you like riding your bike, jump on your bike. Like just do it.
Do something for
people,
you.
like I ride my bike to work and it's like, that's great. And I, that's awesome that you do that. But like, are you riding your bike to work because it's work? Or are you riding your bike to feel like a kid again? Are you riding it? Like, people say like, well, I enjoy doing it. It's like, I know, but the reason you're doing it is to get to work. Not just riding your bike aimlessly for no goddamn reason. Like do that. Get lost. Go get lost. Like start turning down streets that you don't know where you're gonna end up. That's that's fun. Like, and I know a lot of people listening might be like, well, that's weird. But I mean, shit, man, like it's crazy, like especially how connected we are with everything now, right? And honestly, how connected we are, I don't think you'd get lost, but I mean, it's just like, it's just crazy, man. Like, it's really sad where like this day and age that people can't find 1 or 2 hours to themselves to just, peace out. Like, just go for a walk on the seawall, go in the Stanley Park. Just peace out. Put your phone, like you said earlier, put your phone away, turn it off. Have your phone off so no one can reach you. It's actually a really good feeling.
Yeah.
When no one can actually reach you and you don't have something buzzing and like, yeah. And like, just change your ways. Like, it's like, fuck, man, if you go to the same job every day and you take the same route every day, I encourage you to go right instead of left. Like find another way. And people go like, oh, why? Like, why would you do that? And it's like, because you can. Like, you can do that. Yeah, it might take you an extra 5 minutes longer, but like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But that's like part of the adventure. Like that's part of being human. Like you have the choice to do that. But, like people will get up the same morning every day, put the coffee maker on, make the same breakfast, get in the same car, take the same route, go to work. We're around the same people that are in the same boat. Like it's just like, come back, make the same food and sit down, watch the same show and go to bed. And then rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. It's like, man, that is so mundane. And all I'm saying is like, just go the other way this time. Just fucking do it. Like, it's, yeah. It's
Dude,
great.
I 100% agree with you. I remember this one time, that's happened many times. I've ended up going down a street and I've driven down that street many times. And my brain is like, I always wondered what was down this street. There's nothing really there, but I just never drove down it. And I think that that's a great way to kind of end this podcast is like, metaphorically, go down a different street, go out to a different path. If you're walking in a path in nature, walk off the path. who cares if you get lost? Go get lost so you can get found.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
No, man. Thanks for inviting me, man. Love you. And yeah, this is super cool.
Yeah,
Right.
dude.
Yeah, man. And we'll have to get over the tasses.
Yeah, dude. I'm down to go there again, and I definitely I love you too, man. You're a very valued. You're part of my family now. You're a family member. You're a good friend. I
Yeah.
love these kind of conversations, and I always feel like full. I feel like having these conversations, doing this podcast, talking about this stuff, it just fills my cup up, and hopefully it can fill other people's cups up that are listening to it too. So on that note, thank you, Dane. I appreciate you, man. And we'll have to have you on again.
Yeah. Sounds good, brother.
All right. See you, Ben.